when a man standing 6 feet 9 inches tall walked into the lobby of the Paradigm Boutique Hotel in downtown Columbus, Ohio. Nobody at the reception counter looked up from their monitors. He did not arrive in a long black SUV with tinted windows. There were no flashing cameras, no towering security guards clearing a path through the revolving glass doors, and no frantic personal assistants barking orders into wireless earpieces to demand special treatment for a global icon. He was entirely alone, wrapped in a plain black fleece hoodie, with the hood pulled down low over his brow, casting a deep shadow across a face that had been printed on billions of magazine covers and billboards across the earth. On his feet were a pair of weathered, first-generation turf sneakers with scuffed rubber soles, and slung over his massive shoulder was a faded canvas gym bag, its zipper slightly rusted at the tracks. He looked like an aging athlete who had just finished a long, solitary workout at a public park, a quiet stranger looking for nothing more than a mattress and a heavy blanket to escape the freezing Midwestern drizzle outside. He walked with an unhurried, heavy stride that carried the weight of 22 years of relentless battles on the hardwood, his boots making no sound as he approached the wide reception desk. The lobby around him was immaculate, designed with cold white quartz and brushed steel accents that smelled faintly of expensive eucalyptus and industrial glass cleaner. A young man behind the counter, whose silver name tag read Julian, was clicking a wireless mouse with rapid, mechanical precision, his eyes locked onto a spreadsheet that illuminated his pale face in a sterile blue glow. Julian was 24 years old, had graduated from a hospitality program in Chicago 4 months prior, and had been taught that excellence was measured by how closely a worker could adhere to the digital protocols displayed on their terminal. He did not know what it felt like to sleep on a floor. He did not know what it meant to build something from nothing. And he certainly did not recognize LeBron James without a flashing arena spotlight shining directly onto his jersey. LeBron set his old canvas bag onto the white quartz counter with a soft, heavy thud. He did not slam it down, nor did he lean forward to intimidate the young man. He simply stood there, waiting for 3 full minutes while Julian finished entering a row of numbers into his system. When the clerk finally raised his eyes, his gaze swept over the oversized black hoodie, the faded fabric of the gym bag, and the damp mist clinging to the fabric of the man's shoulders. Julian did not offer the welcoming smile that was explicitly detailed in paragraph 2 of the employee handbook. Instead, he gave the faint transactional nod reserved for ordinary travelers who had wandered into the wrong zip code. "I need a room for the night," LeBron said. His voice was a low, resonant rumble, flat and unhurried, like heavy stones being dragged across a thick wooden floor. Julian clicked his mouse twice, his fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard with practiced indifference. "I am sorry, sir, but we have absolutely no availability this evening," Julian said, his voice carrying the rehearsed crispness of a corporate recording. "The entire property has been locked down under a corporate hold for the Vanguard Venture Capital Autumn Summit. All 98 suites are fully committed." LeBron looked at the monitor, then down at the clean quartz counter where his own hands rested. His palms were wide, calloused from decades of gripping leather basketballs and heavy iron weights, a stark contrast to the smooth, unblemished fingers of the clerk. He did not pull out his phone to call the billionaire investors who financed the very summit taking place upstairs. He did not demand to see a manager. He did not flash his championship rings, and he did not utter a single word about his name being etched into the deed of the foundation they were standing on. He merely nodded once, a slow, patient tilt of his head that accepted the answer without agreeing with the spirit behind it. "All right," LeBron said softly. He picked up the faded canvas gym bag by its fabric straps, turned away from the counter, and walked toward the far corner of the expansive lobby. There, tucked away from the main glass entrance, was a wide leather sofa, its dark hide creased and worn soft at the cushions, positioned directly in front of a monumental brick fireplace, where a small log was burning down to white ash. LeBron sat down in the center of the leather sofa. He did not check his phone, he did not fidget with his zipper, and he did not look at the clock on the wall. He simply leaned back, rested his large forearms against his knees, and began to watch the tiny orange flames lick the black brick. He sat with the absolute stillness of a man who owned every square inch of the room, possessing a long memory and a very patient kind of power that could outweigh any corporate protocol ever written. 45 minutes passed in total silence. Julian checked in 3 more executives who wore identical tailored gray suits and blue conference lanyards, their leather loafers clicking sharply against the floor as they hurried toward the elevators. Each time Julian glanced toward the corner by the fireplace, the giant in the black hoodie was still there, motionless as a mountain, watching the wood turn to embers. Then, the heavy oak doors at the back of the lobby swung open, and the chief operating officer of the property walked out of a private dining room, surrounded by a small cloud of expensive cologne and the echoes of polite laughter. His name was Sterling Vance. He was 46 years old, wore a perfectly tailored navy blazer with brass buttons, and carried an encrypted tablet in his left hand like a shield. He was a man who believed the world was an untidy place that could only be saved by spreadsheets, optimization algorithms, and the systematic elimination of waste. As he walked toward the reception desk, an assistant hurried over and whispered something into his ear, pointing a trembling finger toward the fireplace. Sterling Vance turned his head slowly, his eyes landing on the massive figure sitting on the leather sofa. In the span of a single heartbeat, the practiced corporate smirk vanished from Sterling's face, and the natural color drained from his cheeks until his skin matched the white quartz of the counter. He recognized LeBron James instantly. He understood, with terrifying clarity, that his tightly controlled, perfectly optimized hotel had just committed a mistake that no public relations firm could ever erase. But what Sterling Vance did not know, as he began to walk toward the fireplace with his teeth clenched tight, was that this 45-minute wait was only the very beginning of a long, quiet reckoning that would dismantle everything he had spent 2 years building. The leather sofa under LeBron's weight was more than a piece of high-end furniture. To anyone else, it was just an expensive amenity selected by a design consultant to fill a void in a luxury lobby. But to LeBron, every stitch in that hide was tied to a memory. He sat perfectly still, listening to the crackle of the wood fire, letting the rhythm of the flames carry his mind back 25 years, long before the lights of the global arenas had ever cast his shadow across the world. He remembered a small apartment on Hickory Street in Akron, Ohio. He remembered the sound of the Midwestern wind rattling the thin window panes, a cold that didn't just linger outside but seemed to live in the drywall itself. His mother, Gloria James, was barely 19 years old when she was trying to raise a giant of a boy on her own, moving from one rented room to another, her entire life packed into a few cardboard boxes that were always taped shut, ready for the next eviction notice. There was one winter, the brutal blizzard of December 1998, that LeBron would never forget. He was 14 years old, his feet growing so rapidly that his old sneakers had split completely down the sides, exposing his socks to the freezing gray slush of the Akron streets. Gloria had spent her last $8 on a gallon of milk and a loaf of white bread. There was no money left for clothing, no money for new shoes, and no father to call for help. LeBron remembered sitting at a broken plastic kitchen table, watching his mother take an empty cardboard box from a generic brand of cornflakes. With a pair of dull kitchen scissors, her hands shaking slightly from the cold, she carefully cut out 2 rectangular pieces of cardboard. She pushed those cardboard cutouts deep inside his split sneakers, flattening them against the insoles so they would act as a barrier against the freezing mud on his walk to school. "It's going to keep your feet dry for today, LeBron," she had whispered, smoothing back his hair with her thumb. Her skin was rough, worn down by working 2 late-shift laundry jobs at a local hospital. But her touch was lighter than silk. "We just have to get through this winter. The world outside is cold, baby, but as long as we keep the inside warm, nobody can break us." LeBron had walked 3 miles through the snow that morning. The cardboard had turned to mush by noon, but he had never complained. He had kept his head down, focused on the classroom floor, carrying his mother's words' chest like a shield. When he finally made it to the NBA, when the multi-million-dollar contracts were signed, and the world began to treat him like royalty, he did not buy an island or build a fortress to isolate himself from reality. Instead, he had quietly bought this boutique hotel in downtown Columbus, not as an investment portfolio line item, but as an anchor for his history. He had personally overseen the early renovations before Sterling Vance was ever hired. LeBron had tracked down the salvaged maple hardwood planks from an old abandoned community center gymnasium in East Akron. The very gym where his mother used to sit on a cold metal folding chair for 4 hours straight, watching him practice layout drills when nobody else believed in him. He had paid a local carpenter 4 times the market rate to restore those historic planks and lay them down right here in this lobby, so that every wealthy executive who walked through these doors would be stepping on the foundation of his sweat and his mother's sacrifice. He had chosen the deep leather sofas because they reminded him of the old, worn couch in the apartment of the basketball coach who had given him a place to sleep when his own home was lost. But as the modern world grew faster, and as the business grew larger, a dangerous kind of distance had formed. LeBron had been forced to rely on corporate managers and polished executives to run the daily operations while he was busy competing across the country. And in that distance, the cold, calculated logic of the corporate machine had crept into the Paradigm Hotel like mold behind a fresh coat of paint. Executives like Sterling Vance had arrived with their degrees and their efficiency matrices, looking at the historic Akron hardwood floor and seeing only something that required too much maintenance. They had looked at the simple, welcoming spirit of the property and decided it wasn't exclusive enough for the elite clientele they wanted to attract. They had begun to erase the soul of the building, one small optimization at a time, replacing the warmth of a mother's love with the icy precision of a spreadsheet. And LeBron had sat there on that couch for 45 minutes, completely invisible, watching the exact moment his own deist history was turned away at the door by a system he had funded with his own life. Sterling Vance smooths the lapels of his navy blazer as he steps away from the reception counter, his shiny leather loafers tapping a hollow, rhythmic beat against the floor. He does not run, for a man of his self-proclaimed stature does not panic in front of subordinates, but his breath is short and shallow. He stops exactly 2 feet from the leather sofa, casting a cold corporate shadow over LeBron, who remains perfectly still, his eyes still fixed on the dying embers of the fireplace. "Mr. James," Vance says, his voice adopting an immediate fluid warmth that sounds as if it had been extracted from a training video for high-end luxury hospitality. What an absolute honor. "I was just made aware of the unfortunate misunderstanding at the front desk. Julian is quite new, a recent recruit from our premium training track, and he was simply following the automated protocols for the Vanguard Capital Summit. I sincerely apologize for the inconvenience. We will rectify this immediately." LeBron does not stand up. He does not shift his weight or remove the hood that shadows his face. He raises his head slowly, looking at Vance with a steady, unblemished gaze that has stared down the most hostile crowds in sports history. "The kid said there were no rooms," LeBron says, his voice flat, dropping like a heavy block of stone into the quiet space between them. "He said the whole building was locked down." Vance offers a polite, tightly controlled corporate smile, his teeth perfectly white, his eyes remaining entirely cold. "Well, technically, the premium executive suites on the top 4 floors are fully occupied by the managing directors of Vanguard. It is an exclusive, multi-million-dollar portfolio booking that requires absolute operational compliance. However, for a lifetime partner of your status, I can personally authorize a manual override. We can vacate one of the tech consulting teams from a standard suite on the third floor and have it prepared for you within 30 minutes. I told you, I didn't make a reservation, LeBron says, his words separating cleanly in the air. I don't want you moving anybody out of their room. The kid told me what the protocol was. He was just doing his job. Your job. Vance blinks, his jaw tightening by a fraction of a millimeter. The tablet in his left hand emits a soft, green notification light, indicating that another high-net-worth investor has just scanned their digital credential at the VIP lounge upstairs. To a man like Vance, that green light is the only metric of success that matters. For 24 months, he had managed the Paradigm Boutique Hotel with a single goal: to erase any trace of casual, working-class warmth and replace it with an ironclad structure of premium tiers and optimized revenue. He had looked at the salvaged Akron Community Center hardwood floor that LeBron had lovingly installed, and he had ordered his maintenance crew to cover it with a thick, sterile gray industrial carpet, claiming that the exposed wood grain looked too provincial and did not project the image of a world-class financial destination. He had walked into the Ching and ordered the removal of the physical guest book, the heavy, leather-bound volume, where regular families and traveling students had left handwritten notes, drawings, and raw expressions of gratitude. Vance had thrown it into a cardboard box in the basement, replacing it with a digital feedback loop that automatically emailed an automated survey to guests 24 hours after checkout, analyzing their satisfaction via an algorithmic sentiment score. More than that, Vance had changed the name of the hotel's signature kitchen. LeBron had originally named it Gloria's Kitchen, a warm, bustling restaurant that served thick cornbread, slow-roasted chicken, and sweet potato pie according to his mother's old recipes, a place where local factory workers and high-end guests sat at adjacent tables. Vance felt the name sounded too casual, too tied to a story of struggle that did not belong in a luxury establishment. He had rebranded it as the Apex Horizon Lounge, hiring a French consultant to design a menu of micro-portions and gold leaf Wagyu beef that cost $240 a plate. He had systematically eliminated the 30% employee discount that allowed the hotel's kitchen and laundry staff to bring their families in for dinner on their birthdays. He had cut the local community scholarship fund by 40% to balance the quarterly operational budget, burying the decision deep within an automated email update that he knew LeBron's busy business managers would likely overlook. Vance had done an exceptional job according to every metric his software could measure. He had increased the net operating income by 18%, but in doing so, he had turned a sanctuary of human respect into a cold, automated trap that ground down the very people who kept the lights on. "If you prefer not to disturb the summit clients, Mr. James," Vance says, leaning in slightly, his tone shifting into a patronizing, quiet murmur, "we do have a standard operational accommodation on the ground floor. It is room 104, located at the very end of the service corridor, right next to the linen storage. It is typically reserved for short-stay contract vendors or lower-tier administrative staff, but it is clean, quiet, and entirely out of the way of the corporate events. Of course, it lacks the premium view of the downtown skyline, looking out instead at the gravel driveway of the commercial loading dock. But it is available immediately." Julian, the young clerk at the desk, watches from a distance, holding his breath as his boss offers the owner of the entire enterprise a room meant for an assistant's assistant. Julian does not understand luxury as a form of human grace. He understands it as a badge of authority. He expects LeBron to explode, to roar, to demand Vance's termination on the spot. Instead, LeBron stands up from the leather sofa. His massive frame towers over Vance, casting a vast, silent shadow across the pristine white quartz lobby. He reaches down and picks up the faded canvas gym bag with his calloused hand. "Give me the key card to 104, LeBron says. Vance stares at him, completely unready for this response. He had prepared himself for a legal battle, for a shouting match, for a display of celebrity ego that he could easily counter with references to corporate bylaws and summit insurance clauses. He had not prepared himself for a dignity so heavy that it made his own tailored navy blazer feel like a cheap costume. "Right away, sir," Vance stammers, turning toward the desk with a sudden, uncoordinated jerk of his shiny leather shoes. The door to room 104 clicked shut with a metallic sound that echoed down the narrow, whitewashed walls of the service corridor. LeBron set his faded canvas gym bag on the edge of the narrow twin mattress. The room was cold, smelling faintly of industrial bleach and damp cardboard from the linen supply room next door. Through the high, rectangular window near the ceiling, all he could see was the concrete retaining wall of the loading dock and the occasional flicker of yellow headlights from delivery trucks turning into the alleyway. He sat on the bed for a long time, the springs groaning softly under his weight. He did not look at his watch, and he did not turn on the television. He simply took his phone out of his hoodie pocket, dialed a number he knew by heart, and waited for 2 rings. "Marcus," LeBron said into the receiver. His voice was no louder than a whisper, but it carried the absolute finality of a referee's whistle at the end of a game. "I am in room 104 of the Paradigm. Bring the team. Bring everything from the past 24 months. A pause came on the line, followed by the deep, heavy breath of Marcus Thornton, LeBron's lifelong advisor and the architect of his global enterprise. Marcus did not ask how the owner of a $100 million property ended up in a vendor's room on the ground floor. He had worked with LeBron long enough to know that when the giant sat in the dark, a storm was already crossing the horizon. "We will be there by 6 in the morning," Marcus replied. Before the sun could clear the glass towers of downtown Columbus, LeBron was already walking the concrete stairs into the basement of his hotel. He did not wear a suit, and he did not carry a clipboard. He kept his black hoodie pulled low, his hands tucked deep into his pockets, his worn turf sneakers gripping the raw concrete steps. The basement was where the real machinery lived, far below the white quartz counters and the high-net-worth summit clients. This was the world of industrial laundry extractors that shook the floorboards, rows of heavy iron pipes wrapped in insulation, and the sharp, honest smell of detergent and sweat. He found Martha first. She was a 61-year-old grandmother with silver hair tied back in a neat bun, her arms dark from years of pulling steaming bed sheets out of the heavy dryers. She had worked at the property long before Sterling Vance had ever arrived with his corporate matrices. When she saw the massive figure in the hoodie step into the laundry room, her hands froze mid-fold, her eyes widening in sudden recognition. "Mr. James," she whispered, smoothing her apron down with a trembling hand. "Don't stop working on my account, Martha," LeBron said, stepping closer, his voice settling over the roar of the machines like a warm blanket. "How are things down here?" Martha looked toward the heavy metal security door at the end of the hall before she spoke, her voice dropping so low it was almost lost to the thunder of the dryers. "The break room window is gone, Mr. James," she said, her fingers tightening around the edge of a white pillowcase. "Mr. Vance had the maintenance crew wall it in 10 months ago. He said we needed the extra 3 feet of space to store the premium bath towels for the VIP suites. We used to eat our lunch and see the grass outside. Now it's just brick. It's a small thing, I know, but it made the day feel shorter." LeBron nodded slowly, his eyes dropping to the concrete floor. "It's not a small thing," he said softly. He walked further into the mechanical labyrinth, finding Silas, the veteran plumber who had kept the building's veins clear for 12 years. Silas was sitting on a plastic milk crate, repairing a bronze pressure valve with a rusted wrench. His tool belt was heavy, mended in 3 places with black electrical tape. They cut the maintenance budget twice since last spring, Mr. James, Silas said, not with anger, but with the flat, tired certainty of a working man who had been asked to do too much with too little. We're doing repairs with whatever scrap parts we can find in the old bins. The water pressure in the lower wing has been dropping for months, but Vance told us to ignore it unless a premium tier client complains. He told us to focus on the luxury penthouse lines. By 8 in the morning, LeBron had stood in the shadows of the kitchen and listened to Elena, a 21-year-old server whose name tag was slightly crooked. She told him how the employee discount had been removed in an automated policy update buried deep in a 40-page digital PDF that most workers didn't know how to open on their phones. I used to bring my little brother here on his birthday, Elena said, her eyes casting down toward her non-slip shoes. He liked seeing the big lights in the sunken. We can't afford it now. The new menu isn't for people like us. LeBron kept every word in his head, letting the testimonies stack up like an ironclad legal brief. At exactly 9 o'clock, he walked up the stairs to the executive wing on the mezzanine floor, followed by Marcus Thornton and 3 forensic auditors who carried heavy, identical leather briefcases. They did not knock on the door of the chief operating officer's office. LeBron simply pushed it open with his wide palm. Sterling Vance was sitting behind his minimalist glass desk, checking a series of financial projections on his tablet. He had his perfectly tailored navy blazer on, his hair combed tight to his skull, looking like a man who believed the world could be governed by numbers alone. When the door swung open and LeBron stepped in, followed by the silent suits and tie audit team, Vance's polished smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he caught himself and stood up. "Mr. James," Vance said, adjusting his cuffs, "I didn't expect you up here so early. I trust room 104 was sufficient for an overnight stay?" "Sit down, Sterling," LeBron said. The words were not shouted, but they carried a dense weight that seemed to suck the air completely out of the room. Vance sat down, his hands folding instinctively over his digital tablet. Marcus Thornton stepped forward, opening a thick blue folder and placing 3 pages of financial summaries directly over Vance's screen. "Mr. Vance," Marcus said, his voice cold and analytical, like a machine calculating an error. "We spent the last 8 hours reviewing the event contracts for the Vanguard Capital Summit, specifically the third-party referral fees paid out over the past 18 months. There is a logistics consulting firm, registered under a generic name in Delaware, that has been collecting a 12% service charge on every premium block booking made at this property." Vance's fingers tightened against each other, his knuckles turning a sharp white. "That is a standard vendor arrangement approved under my operational charter to incentivize high-yield corporate accounts," Vance said, his voice remaining remarkably steady, a testament to years of executive training. "It maximizes our portfolio visibility. The Delaware Corporation has exactly 1 registered beneficial owner," Marcus continued, turning a page to reveal a certified copy of a state registration document. "Your name is on the deed, Mr. Vance. You have redirected exactly $75,000 of hotel community development funds into your personal account over the last year and a half. That is not operational management. That is a criminal breach of your fiduciary duty to this enterprise." The silence that followed was heavy, pressing against the glass walls of the executive office. Vance looked at the signature on the document, then up at LeBron, who was standing by the window, his large back turned to the desk, looking down at the city street below. The polished corporate surface had finally peeled away from Vance's face, revealing something small, panicked, and human underneath. "I made this place profitable," Vance said, his voice dropping into a desperate, raw whisper that had no corporate cadence left in it. "When I took over, you were leaving money on the table. You were running a luxury asset like a community center. I brought in the Vanguard Group. I built the structure that allowed this hotel to compete at the highest level." LeBron turned around slowly from the window. He walked over to the desk, leaning down until his face was inches from Vance's tight jaw. "You made it more profitable, the way you make a fire hotter by burning the furniture." "Sterling," LeBron said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that shook the desk glass. "Eventually, there is nothing left to sit on. You covered the Akron wood. You hid the stories of the people who built this place. You took a window away from an old woman who spent 14 years washing your sheets just so you could stack a few more towels. You didn't build an empire, man. You just built a cage for yourself out of other people's dignity." Vance absorbed the words, his chin dropping slightly, as the reality of his position settled into his chest. He looked at the legal folder, then at Marcus's unblinking gaze. He knew the terms before they were even spoken. A man who lives by the contract knows exactly what happens when the clause is broken. "What do you want?" Vance whispered. "You sign your resignation today," Marcus said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the glass desk. "You return the $75,000 to the Employee Family Scholarship Fund within 30 days. You sign a non-disclosure agreement that bars you from ever entering a property owned by this enterprise again. If you comply, we settle this here. If you hesitate, the sheriff's department is waiting downstairs to escort you out in front of your Vanguard clients." Vance looked at the pen resting on the desk. His hand trembled by a fraction of an inch as he picked it up, his signature spilling across the paper with none of the controlled precision he had prided himself on for 2 years. "The break-room window goes back in today," LeBron said, turning his back on the desk and walking toward the door. "That is not part of the negotiation. That is just what is happening before noon." By 3 o'clock that afternoon, the mechanical hum of the Paradigm Boutique Hotel had shifted into a completely different frequency. The silence that had once hung over the property like a sheet of ice was broken by the rhythmic, honest sound of hammers and saws down in the basement. Silas and Jerome were working with their sleeves rolled up, their tool belts clinking against their hips as they knocked away the drywall that had blocked the sunshine for 10 months. When the last block of masonry crumbled, a wide flood of pale Midwestern afternoon light spilled across the concrete floor of the staff break room, illuminating the folding table where Martha was sitting with her coffee. She didn't say a word. She just closed her eyes, raised her face toward the warm sunbeams, and let a slow, deep smile break across her wrinkled cheeks. Up in the main lobby, the changes were just as quiet, but carried a monumental weight. Marcus and his team had already supervised the removal of the sterile gray industrial carpet. The thick fabric was rolled up and carried out the back door, exposing the rich honey-colored grain of the historic Akron Community Center maple planks underneath. The wood still bore the faint, dark circular marks where metal folding chairs had rested decades ago, and the scuff marks of young boys chasing a leather ball in the dark. LeBron stood near the fireplace, watching the maintenance crew carefully rehang the 12 archival black-and-white photographs along the East Wing corridor. The pale rectangles on the walls were finally covered, the ghosts of the past replaced by the living history of the town. The heavy, leather-bound guest book was returned to its rightful place. On the center of the quartz counter, its pages opened to a blank sheet, waiting for the handwriting of the next stranger. Over the restaurant entrance, the cold chrome sign for the Apex Horizon Lounge was taken down by 2 workers. In its place, the old wooden sign with the slightly chipped lower corner was mounted back onto the frame, its faded gold lettering reading Gloria's Kitchen once more. When Elena walked under the sign for her evening shift, she stopped for a brief moment, running her fingers gently across the nick in the wood. She looked toward the kitchen, her eyes bright with a sudden pure relief. And then she walked into the dining room, with her shoulders held a little higher than they had been in 2 years. LeBron walked back down to room 104 to gather his things. The room was still small, and it still smelled of laundry bleach, but the heavy shadow that had followed him into the property had completely dissolved. The old canvas gym bag was packed, its rusted zipper drawn shut. He picked up the central historical photograph, the one Marcus's team had retrieved from the basement storage room behind the paper towels. It was an unframed wide print of himself and his mother, Gloria, taken on the rainy night he had been drafted into the NBA. They were both laughing hysterically, their heads tilted back, completely unbothered by the sudden downpour that had soaked their clothes outside the arena. As LeBron lifted the frame to carry it to the lobby, the aged cardboard backing board shifted slightly, its dried adhesive cracking open after years of neglect. A small piece of cream-colored stationery, folded tightly into quarters along soft, rounded lines, slipped out from the gap between the print and the board, fluttering down onto the narrow twin mattress. LeBron set the frame down carefully against the wall. He picked up the folded paper with his wide, calloused fingers. He recognized the paper instantly. It was the heavy, linen fiber stock his mother used to keep in a tin box under her bed, the paper she saved only for things that were too important to be spoken out loud. His hands were perfectly steady as he unfolded the page, but as his eyes landed on the neat, uneven cursive script, his breath caught sharply in his chest. The note was dated October 14, 2014, the day the hotel had first opened its doors. If you are reading this, LeBron, the note began, it means someone forgot what we built this place for, and you had to come back and fix it. Knowing the boy I raised, you probably didn't say much. You probably just sat in a quiet chair, waited until the noise died down, and then put the pieces back together without making a fuss. I put this note here because I knew that if the foundation ever cracked, your hands would be the ones to touch this frame again. This hotel isn't a business, baby. It's the proof that a mother and her son survived the winter. It's the evidence that no matter how cold the world gets outside, some people will choose every single day to keep the lights on and the fire burning so a stranger doesn't have to sleep in the snow. That is all that matters. Be gentle with the people who work here, LeBron. They are just like we used to be, trying to get through the season with whatever cardboard they can find for their shoes. The song I was humming in the garden the morning we picked out the roses. You asked me what it was, and I told you I didn't know. That was true then. I was just happy, and when a person is truly happy after a long winter, their mouth just moves on its own without asking permission. But I looked it up later in an old book at the library. It's an old song from 1920 called Look for the Silver Lining. The words are real simple, LeBron. It says that inside every cloud, there is a piece of light waiting for the person who is patient enough and brave enough to find it. I believe that when we were sleeping on the floor on Hickory Street, and I believe it now. Take care of the roses. Take care of the home. Take care of yourself. All my love, Mom. LeBron sat down on the edge of the narrow mattress, the cream-colored paper resting open on his knee. He did not look away, and he did not try to stop the single, heavy tear that traced a slow path down his wide cheek, dropping silently onto the faded fabric of his black hoodie. The room around him was completely still, the high window letting in the distant rumble of the city. But inside the four walls of room 104, the winter had finally ended. He stayed there for 20 minutes, listening to the quiet cadence of his mother's voice in his head, letting the words settle into his bones like an ancient truth that had never left him. When he finally stood up, he folded the paper carefully along its original lines. He pushed it deep into his shirt pocket, placing it close against his ribs, right next to his heart, where he kept the things he could never afford to lose. He carried the photograph up the concrete stairs and into the main lobby. Jerome was waiting by the fireplace with his ladder, his level, and two small brass nails held between his lips. LeBron didn't say a word. He handed the frame to the old maintenance chief, stepping back to the center of the restored Akron hardwood floor to watch. "A little to the left, Jerome," LeBron said, his voice returning to that low, steady rumble that carried no anger and no urgency. "Just right there. That's the spot." Jerome drove the nails into the drywall, with 2 clean, measured strikes of his hammer. He settled the hanging wire onto the hooks, stepped down from the ladder, and adjusted the frame by a fraction of an inch until it sat perfectly level against the white quartz accent wall. The morning light from the tall lobby windows caught the glass of the frame, making the image of the young mother and her giant son glow with a sudden warm radiance. It looked as if the happiness captured inside the frame had been generating its own heat for 12 years, completely untouched by the corporate matrices and the optimization plans that had tried to lock it away. Jerome gathered his tools, looking at the print for a long moment before turning back to LeBron. "The window is completely in, sir," the old man said, offering a short, respectful nod. "You can see the whole courtyard from the laundry tables now." "Thank you, Jerome," LeBron said. The lobby was beginning to fill now as the evening approached. Regular travelers were walking through the revolving glass doors, their bags rolling smoothly across the historic maple planks that gave the room a deep, resonant echo. The smell of slow-roasted chicken and warm cornbread was drifting out from the open doors of Gloria's kitchen, drawing people toward the tables where the ceiling speakers had been turned off, replaced by an old wooden radio on the counter that was playing a local jazz station with a slight, comforting crackle. LeBron walked over to the reception desk. He stood before the heavy guest book, picked up the pen on its tiny metal chain, and looked at the blank page for a moment. In the handwriting that was not elegant, but was perfectly clear, he wrote a single line: "This house was built to keep the inside warm." He set the pen down, turned toward the glass entrance, and walked out into the cool Ohio evening. He did not look back to see if people were watching, and he did not wait for an announcement. Outside, on the brick border of the driveway, a small brown sparrow landed on the branch of the yellow rose bush that his mother had chosen. The bird stayed there for a long time, its feathers damp from the mist, completely still against the dark green leaves. And the Paradigm Hotel breathed in and out behind it, a house that had been given back to its own name, holding its stories close under a roof that was wide enough to cover everyone.